So today in class, I loved how you held me accountable for the use of my equal sign. And so in reflection, I just felt like it was necessary for me to go back to discussing the strategy of partial quotients with more proficiency, as well as possibly being able to address the questions that were being asked at the end of class. I didn't feel like we had enough time. So what I'm going to do is go back and look at 745 divided by 3, and we're going to look at finding the quotient. We also talked about how we could restate this in regards to saying how many 3s go into 745, or how many groups. We don't know the groups, I'll just put kind of like a blank space. How many groups of 3 will get us to 745? Okay, so let us set this up. 745 is our dividend, and then our divisor is 3. Okay, so we're looking at 745, and when you're thinking about how many groups of 3 can we create that's close to 745? Now, for some of you, you may think, well, I know 100 groups of 3 give me 300, so I could use that. Some of you may think, well, I could do 150 groups of 3. That would give me 450, right? Some of you could think, well, I can do 200 groups of 3, and that would give me 600. So you can decide essentially what number of goes in here, because it doesn't matter, because in the end, as you're going through and calculating the number of groups of 3, you'll end up with the same answer. So in class, what we did was we referenced the number 200. Okay, 200 groups of 3. And so one of the reasons a student maybe looked at that is thinking about how many hundreds could I put in here that would be less than 745. So 200 groups of 3 would give me 600, but 300 groups of 3 would give me 900, which is too much. So 200 groups of 3 is 600. Okay, and that's a much better way of representing kind of like that thought process. So we know that there are 200, if there's 200 groups of 3, that in reference is talking about 600. And when I subtract that, I end up with 145. So yes, there's more than 200 groups that would make 745, but we chose to pick 200 groups. So you can either leave the number of groups on the side here, or some people like to reference them like up here. Okay, and if you prefer on the side, then don't worry about this part up here. If you prefer it up here, you don't have to worry about it on the side. Okay, all right, so now I'm going to go through that process again. So I have 145. Okay, so I need groups of 3. Okay, so if you want, we could think of, well, I could do 10 groups of 3, and that would be 30. Okay, for me, if that was the case, then we'd have a lot more steps to go kind of like down. So I'm going to think, well, 10 groups of 3 is 30. So how many more can I do? So if I do 20 groups of 3, that's 60. I'm still good. 30 groups of 3 is 90. I'm still all right. 40 groups of 3 is 120. Okay, so I'm getting closer. If I do 50 groups of 3, that's 150. So I don't want to use that, so I'm going to use 40. Now, if I chose to, could I use 41 groups or 42 groups? Yes, but I'm choosing just to use 40 as the number of groups, okay? 40 groups of 3 is 120. Okay, and then I have 25. And again, if you want, you can reference the number of groups up here, however way you want to represent the number of groups you're using. Okay, so then I go back to, okay, how many groups of 3 can I create to get as close as I can to 25, right? So I could use 1 group of 3, 2 groups of 3, right? But in this case, I can go as close to 8, because 8 groups of 3 would give me 24. And then I have 1 left over, right? So 8 groups. So altogether, if I look at the number of groups I had to create, how many groups of 3 I had to create, right? I had to create 248 groups, right? Altogether, 248 groups. So in essence, this is saying 248 groups of 3, right? When we did that in class, we noticed that that actually was 744, right? But our dividend is 745. So that's why we have this number down here, which represents the remainder, right? And because it's the remainder, this is saying that when you multiply 248 3 times, or 3 groups, 248 groups of 3, then we need to add 1 more to get 745, okay? So when we write down the answer for our quotient, 745 divided by 3, our answer is going to be 248 groups of 3, and then we have a remainder 1.